this is one of those places in parenting where it's just very scary to have a teenager.
Episode 142, Should My Teen Be in Cars with New Drivers? What age were you when you started to drive?
So I was 16. I got my license on my birthday. I remember it. I have a November birthday. I remember waking up and it had snowed and I was super bummed, but I was in Colorado and I didn't want to take my driving test in the snow, but I took that test and I passed it the first time. But interestingly, I was young for my grade and my closest friends who were twins had gotten their license in January, a full 11 months before I did. And I had been driving around with them for almost a year before I was driving. So this letter...
How long had they been driving? Like just literally got their license and you were able
got their license, I was in. I was jumping in their car.
It's funny.
Yeah, how about you, Rena? How did it unfold for you?
Well, I, grew up in Tampa, Florida, and at 15 you can get your learners, and by 16 you had your own... you can drive by yourself, and there were no rules about who you could take or who you couldn't take. And I think there are now in many states, right? We're going to get to this, but I want to read this letter because it is, wow. It's a lot of things you wouldn't think about, but here we go. Dear Dr. Lisa and Rena, my son just turned 16. Several of his friends have gotten their driver's license, and many others have permits and are working towards their license. All of a sudden, our son has the expectation that he's now able to drive with all his friends who have licenses. What are the things to think about and talk about when it comes to driving and riding with peers in cars? This feels new and a bit scary. We want to set up common sense parameters, and we need some help. I really appreciate any thoughts you both may have. First, how scared should this parent be, right?
Well, I gotta tell you, Rena, having been through this as a mom, it is so scary when your kid starts riding around, either as a new driver or if they're driven by peers. And we'll come back to the question of whether that's even legal where you live. But I have to tell you, I remember when my older daughter was practicing driving and getting ready to have her driver's license, I had this daydream of yeah, she can drive. We're going to go to an army surplus and purchase a tank. And that is what she's allowed to drive. My kid is going to be driving around Ohio in a tank. Yeah. And those are the only conditions I am comfortable with. And, I had been caring for families in my practice where questions about kids driving, was coming up, and watched how scared parents were. And this letter pulls to mind, it was one of the most tender and hardest clinical things I dealt with. It was a long, long time ago. I had just gotten my PhD and I was practicing in Michigan and I was working at a clinic and I had a client come in and it was a dad and a daughter. The mom was not part of the picture. The daughter was 16. She was about to get her driver's license. The dad was a Michigan State Patrol, and his job as State Patrol was to go to accidents where there had been a lethality.
Wow.
And this guy could not stomach the idea of his daughter driving. And I have such a vivid memory of this sweet, terrified giant cop sitting in my office and this sweet, honestly, enraged 16-year-old girl sitting next to him. And she's like, are you even kidding me? I can't drive. And he's like, are you even kidding me? You have no idea what I see all day. And I have never seen such an impasse. I think eventually we came up with 700 parameters that made it possible for her to get behind the wheel. But Rena, man, it is, wait till your kids are there. It is terrifying.
I feel it already, and my kids are 11 and 12, but we're looking for a new car. I want a new SUV. But in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is probably going to be the vehicle they're going to be driving around in 3-4 years. So I started watching these test dummy videos of all the cars I'm looking at. And then it's you don't go down that rabbit hole. Don't look down that rabbit hole.
Absolutely. And let's take a minute here. We're talking about kids who have the kind of financial access that gives them, the possibility of even getting a driver's license, who, may or may not have access to a car, may have access to their own car. This isn't going to be every kid. Where we are, actually, for lots of reasons, it doesn't make sense to give your kid a car. It never made sense for us to give or have a car that our older daughter, called her own. She always was driving our cars. But I also had the same thing of okay, this is the car my kid's going to be driving when she doesn't know much about driving. And it's
Exactly.
really scary. But not every family is, of course, even in a position to have this worry where they can afford
It's a
to
great point.
have cars for their kids to drive.
It's a great point. Take us back for a second, because not only have you looked at the research and the laws, but you actually had a daughter who went through this. What should parents keep in mind once your kids are officially licensed drivers?
Well, this is one of those places in parenting where it's just very scary to have a teenager. And I wish I was like, and so here's the magic answer to not being worried about your teenager's safety. But there are realities to having teenagers, especially where they leave the house, they go to parties, they are not entirely under our supervision. We cannot 100% guarantee their safety. And I think if I do come up with a magic solution to that problem, I'll tell you first, Rena. But I think that there's also just at some level, we have to say, you have a kid, they pass the driver's test, you do everything you can to prepare them. At some level, you have to hope that it all goes okay. Or if they have a little, issue, it's a little issue, right? And, one of the ways I thought about it as a parent is, there's local driving and there's highway driving. And those are very different safety levels. And so, this is a minor adjustment, and it's not that kids can't have a terrible accident locally, but I think the more time kids can spend driving locally before they're doing a lot of highway driving, probably the better. But we're just working around the edges here, Rena. There is a fundamental core here that having a teenager is scary, and having a teenager who has started to drive is a very scary thing.
What do you think parents need to keep in mind when they get the keys? What are the rules? You have rules. Yeah. You're not anti-technology or anti-social media. You are like, this is our world. Here are some parameters. What would you set up that parents should maybe need to keep in mind?
So you make rules like there is no interacting with your phone when you are, in the car. And it gets to question about like navigators and stuff, and having to figure that out. But it also means we have to be very careful what we're modeling as parents, right?
So true.
Before our kids start driving, about, whether we're like, getting to the stoplight and texting and, like, do we want to be showing that? There's some people who have they themselves and have their kid put their phone in the trunk, while they're driving. Yeah. Like that is not a, bad idea at all. And then, I was listening to this letter. One thing that's really helpful, because this parent is concerned about her son riding around with peers. This is a good concern to have. And the reason that the concern is heavily validated by research is that we have research showing that 16 and 17-year-olds in particular, so new drivers, are more likely to have accidents for every additional passenger in the car who is a peer. So not family members, but for every additional friend who's in the car, the chances of having an accident go up. And we have studied this. It's actually very easy to study, right? You pull the accident data, you pull who was in the car, you look at the age of the driver. And so because of those laws, actually, this is one of those statistics. This is one of those places that's pretty rare where the laws do a really good job of, responding to what we know from the research side. In the 90s, most states put in what's called a graduated driver's license, which is you have your permit before age 16, and then somewhere around 16, and it's not age 16 and 0 months in every state. Some states even push it older, but you get your limited driver's license, I think is what it's called, or intermediate driver's license. That comes with all these extra rules. So you've passed your driver's test, and in most states, the rules are limiting driving at night, that there's curfew times where kids cannot be out driving. And in most states, it is you can have one passenger under the age of 21 who's not a family member, or 0 passengers under the age of 21. And that is true for a year, or that is true for 6 months. So the states have actually taken it upon themselves to use this research to show it is not safe for packs of teenagers to be driving around in cars. We're going to make it illegal. And when those laws came in, immediately we saw a drop in lethal accidents for young drivers.
Wow. By putting laws in place about nighttime driving, how many people can be in the car, you saw the number of teen fatalities drop.
Dramatically. Like,
Wow.
these laws work, the research holds up. So the first thing I think when I listen to this letter is like, well, what state are you in? Because there's a really good chance that your kid's not even allowed to be in another kid's car. And so you've got those laws on your side.
How do you even find out, Lisa? Like, I'm in the state of Connecticut. You're in Ohio. If someone's in Florida or Texas or California, how do they find out what those laws are?
Pretty easy to do a Google search and just, like
good old Google.
Limited driver law, rules in my state. And those will pop right up. And a couple states are pretty, are looser about it. Not all states have this, but the vast majority of states are very rigid about who can be in the car, and they all have like these funny little variables, like there can be an extra teenager if there's also an adult in the car supervising the whole situation. But the laws really get it about the role of having peers in the car.
And it's also great if you're vacationing somewhere that you and your child has, right? I mean, that's another thing that you need to get into.
That's a really good point.
Lisa, you were talking a little bit about the research that you've looked into. I'm just so fascinated by the fact you say with every other kid in the car, it goes up exponentially, the chance of an accident. Why is that? Can you tell us a little bit more about the research?
Yeah, so this, I actually love this study. And, like this is the nerd in me. I just get really excited about studies. And the key study that I want to unpack actually was done by researchers Margot Gardner and actually Larry Steinberg, who joined us on the podcast last season, who has long studied teenagers. And here's how they did this research study. And it's so clever. So they had a lab where they brought in people in 3 different age groups. So they had young teenagers, 13 to 16. They had older teenagers who were 18 to 24, and then they had people over the age of 18 to 22, and then they had people over the age of 24. So 13 to 16, 18 to 22, and then 24 years and older. So they brought each of these groups into a lab, and they had them do a video game where you were driving in the video game, and you were trying to get to where you were going as fast as possible, and there were points for getting there faster. But there were also points taken away for accidents. But it encouraged, frankly, reckless driving. They watched how people in each of these 3 groups, young teenagers, older teenagers, and adults, played this video game when nobody was watching with them, when they were all by themselves in the lab. They recorded that. And what they found is they all drove very similarly. Even the 13 to 16-year-old group was every bit as cautious as the adults. They then brought in age mates to watch them play the video game. So for the 13 to 16-year-old subjects in the research study, they brought in other young teenagers to watch them as they played the video games, and they did this for all of the age groups. And what they discovered is that when they had age mates watching, things changed. The adults drove the same. The adults were no more risky when other adults watched them drive. The older adolescents, the 18 to 22-year-old group, got a little riskier when their age mates were watching. The 13 to 16-year-olds became twice as risky when their friends were watching. So the key in this is the 13 to 16-year-olds drove the same as the adults when they were alone. It's when they have their peers around that things get dangerous. And that's how we have, established this.
So is it partially distraction, also them saying maybe go faster or egging them on and they want to show off? Is it what do you think is really all of the above?
I think it's kind of all of the above. I think in the research study, the peers were silent. They were just present. But it also gets to something we've talked about recently on the podcast of cold and hot reasoning, that you've got 2 different neural systems at work when teenagers are out in the world. They've got their logical, thoughtful, reasonable, driving all by myself neural system. And then they have their, which is what we call cold reasoning. And then they have their hot reasoning, I'm with my friends, this is exciting, and they are more likely to have accidents under those conditions. So those are the kind of research studies that have been game-changing to the laws and actually to adolescent safety.
It makes sense. Makes total sense. I didn't know about these laws, and I didn't know about the research either. Just so fascinating. What do you say for parents? What I think about the was it the Highway Patrol that you data you mentioned
this
earlier,
Michigan State Patrol
guy, and what are rules that you think are reasonable that parents should consider putting in place?
So the kinds of rules I would make, and they can be hard to enforce, no music, right? Even that, right? You know, especially
Mm.
like I like love vibing to music in my
Yeah.
car, but you know, like for teenagers and like I'm sure my own adolescent daughters would like roll their eyes tremendously to hear me say the word vibing in public. But you know, teenagers like
Yeah.
they really vibe to their music. And so, you know, you can say, listen, no music, put your phone in the trunk. Do not text while driving. Do not do any of those things. Your job is to, you know, show us that you're a very safe driver. You know, there's ways you can monitor and technology that helps you monitor. And if you really are anxious about your kid, I would look into that. Like you can monitor the speeds they're going. I mean, there's things like that.
Hmm.
Um, but again, you know, we say this a lot, like you got to know your kid. You got to know if you can trust your kid. If you don't trust your kid, if you're like this, you know, is a very impulsive young person who's not going to follow any of my rules, you know, then maybe you're going to constrain their driving for a while they
Mm.
grow up a bit. But I think no music, no phones, and then, you know, hopefully the laws are on your side and like no driving your friends around.
Hmm.
And if you happen to be in a state where you're like, nope, the laws are not there or not rigid enough, go ahead and make them. Like pull up
Hmm.
the national landscape of these laws and be like, look, I don't know why our state doesn't have these laws. These laws are based in research that keep you safe. I am making this rule. And you know, like it's not forever. It's not.
Hmm.
It's like most of them you get a full driver's license by 17, you know. It's
Hmm.
like it's not, you know, an infinity time,
Hmm.
but this is really, you know, this is big stuff.
It is. It really is. And I also think the point about modeling behavior, I know I'm very guilty. I pick up the phone, I'm at a red light, I'm texting because I need to, you know, find out where the next thing is or whatever we're doing. But I know my kids are watching. Do you have any advice for
Mhm.
parents on modeling good behavior?
Well, it's tough, right? Because we think we can do it and we are more experienced drivers. And, you know, I think a lot of us, and I'll say myself included, have been like, well, I've been doing it and nothing bad has happened,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
it's, you know, kind of reinforcing in that way. I think that it is really worth it as your kids approach driving age to make a big production of saying, you know, I've been thinking about you becoming a driver. I've been thinking about my driving, and I am changing how I'm driving. These are my new rules. I'm going to
Wow.
start putting my phone in the trunk, or I'm going to disable it so even it can't come through. You know, my phone connects to my car, and then sometimes I can take calls that way.
Hmm.
Just say, you know what, I'm going to focus 100%. It's just not worth it.
Hmm.
It's just not worth it. There's nothing I have that is so urgent that it cannot wait till I'm done driving. I would make a big production of it and say, these are the rules for me. These are going to be 100% the rules for you.
That is great about making a big production. But, you know,
Mhm.
it's also hard because like Google Maps is connected to my phone. And if I'm going somewhere new, I'm putting that in. And, or is there an alternative route on the path that we're going that we know, you
Yeah.
know? So I think the reality of how your phones are used for so much is really hard.
It is hard. And the other thing, Rena, I have no sense of direction. Like I'm like
Same.
learning disability level, no sense of
Yeah.
direction. It just doesn't happen to be a learning disability we diagnose.
Yeah.
Did you have this experience? I remember this. I didn't know how to get anywhere. Like when I got my driver's
Hmm.
license, like I
Hmm.
didn't know how to get any of the places I had been going for years
Yeah.
with
Because
somebody else driving.
there was no Google Maps back then, right? When
No.
we were driving. Yeah.
And I have no instincts to fall back on.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about, and actually I found this with my older daughter who does actually have a sense of direction. When you're being driven around, you don't always pay attention. So she actually wasn't very fluent with how to get to the places she was supposed to go once she became a driver. And so one thing that we needed to do, because I didn't want her, you know, trying to use her phone. And a lot of states, it's illegal to use a phone while driving, especially if you're a teenager. Like they have
Hmm.
special laws for that. Um, as part of our driving practice as a family, I had her drive to places that I had driven her. So she started to learn the route as much
Mm.
as she was learning also how to drive.
That's good. I hadn't even thought of that. So, because you do get nervous and, you know, you kind of forget, and it's really, really great. Um, I can't imagine do you have a horrible driving story of your own?
You know, I feel like I got really lucky
Mm.
because I think about like, so I grew up skiing in Colorado and, you know, I had a car that like, I loved my car, but it wasn't a good car. When I think about the driving I did at 16, like
Hmm.
up into the mountains in Colorado on these
Mm.
like, snowy roads with sheer drops. I'm like, how did my parents let me do that? Like, I would never let my kid do that. So luckily nothing bad happened. Did anything happen to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was 16 or it was senior year, and my mom had gone away. It's the first time she'd ever left us, gone away for a month to Kerala, India, where she's from, because her brother was getting married. And so she took the month off and went, and she came back, and I decided to skip school and just go back home to see my mom. I mean, what kind of a nerd am I? Skip school to go home to see
school
mom,
to see your mom
and have lunch. And as I was pulling out of the King High School parking lot in Tampa, Florida, I hit the school police officer's car.
Oh, good job, Rena.
Yeah. Hit the police officer's car as I am leaving school.
Was he cool about it, or was he horrible?
He was such a cool, so
good.
cool. But they had to do a write-up. They had to document it. They had to call another police officer to come in. And the rumor around school, because Mrs. Jackson, who's a teacher I loved, law studies, had brought in a forensic scientist to come in. So the rumor by lunchtime was that I had killed somebody in the school parking lot.
Okay.
Which was not true.
Thank God you did not do that. But also, that's hilarious.
Hot, cold reasoning. That's what
reasoning, right? You're so excited to see your mom. Okay, you get the nerd prize for being so excited to see your mom that is the condition under which hot reasoning kicked in.
Oh, I do love my mom. But, it is scary. And I think there are just so many things when you add cell phones in right now that, back when we were driving, we didn't have that. And to just be disciplined about it. But you worry. I want to give them the freedom. I get excited when my kids get older and they can reach a milestone of independence. But there's so much to think about.
There's so much to think about. And what I will say, and I think a lot of parents will say this, is it also gets better for the parent. That it's very worrisome when your kid first gets their license, or when, if your laws allow it, your kid can be in a car with a kid who just got a license. And then as, the months pass and hopefully everything goes okay and the kids do become more skilled as drivers, like, your anxiety goes down. So it's not a forever problem for the parent either. And it's not that horrible things don't happen, and they do, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't want to minimize that. Here's another one, Rena, for you to think about. A lot of the laws allow family members in the car. Mm-hmm. So one of the scariest thing that also comes up is you get this, so this happened for us, your kid can finally drive, she's 16, and your younger kid needs to go somewhere. Yes. And so then you're like, fantastic, I have a driver. And then you're like, holy moly, my 2 children are in the same car being driven by a new driver. So it's all very scary. And, people should trust their instincts and, make the rules that make sense to them. But there also does happily come a point where you're also thrilled to have your big kid take your younger kid somewhere, because it just makes your life easier if you've got that kind of car situation in your family.
Yeah, we are at the pickup drop-off mania phase, so I welcome it. But you're right, having your 2 most prized possessions in life in one car with very limited driving experience is scary.
It's pretty scary stuff. Yeah. So parenting is not for the faint of heart. Let's just say that.
I wish someone had told me that before we had children. There's so much I wish I had learned before we had children.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
So what do you have for us, Lisa, for parenting to go?
I have a wonderful, wonderful friend who's the mother of 4, all of whom, her youngest is a junior in high school. So she's really parented through adolescence. And she's just this incredibly steady, sturdy person. And she has a phrase that I try to hold on to sometimes. She says, I just don't let my mind go there. And what she's talking about is she's had a lot of nights where one of her teenagers was out late, wasn't 1,000,000% sure where they were, wasn't 1,000,000% sure what the story was. And like all of us as a loving parent, her mind can start to go down some really scary roads of where, what's wrong and what could go wrong. And I have really tried to hold on to that sometimes in my own parenting. I'll just think, okay, I'm going to learn from my friend. You don't have to let your mind go there, especially if there is nothing you can do. You don't have to torture yourself.
So much of what we create is in our head.
We can make it bad for ourselves. So do logical, rational things to, assure as much safety as you can. And then if you're really, really struggling, think about what my friend has said to me. Does your mind have to go there?
That's good. I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week.